Hello, I'm David Hunt and welcome to today's show. My guest today, apart from the fact that I've been picking on her endlessly for the time setting up today, but I'll be nice now because I have to.
Oh, good. I'm so happy.
She's very much involved in the arts, mostly theatre and literature, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. During her 30 years, she's done a lot of historic events that she's covered in her books and bios as well, which is fascinating. She's written a lot of books and of really interesting stuff. She got kicked off. She was the chair of the International PEN, get it, PEN, a Women's Writers Committee. And in 2016, won the Victorian Community History Award for her book, The Village of Ripponlea. Ripponlea, that beautiful suburb here in Melbourne. 2018, moving on, Fellowship of Australia Writers Award for her Acland Street book, The Lady of St Kilda. I live in St Kilda and I know all about Acland Street. I bet you I know more than her. 2020, Upstream, Against the Current, the story of women's rowing in Australia. And get this year she is releasing, it's literally just around the corner, by now it's probably already out, The Making of the Victorian Pride Centre. She's so important that she's even got, I have to call her Dr Judith Buckrich. Hello.
Hello. I think I'll just go now. Nothing left to say. You've said it all.
I've said it all. So where were you born?
I was born in Budapest, in Hungary.
In Hungary?
Yes.
Right. And how old were you?
Well, we left, so I was born in 1950, same year as you, David.
Yep.
And we left after the 1956 uprising. So we arrived here at the beginning of 1958.
Right, okay.
So I was only 8 when I arrived here.
Do you remember, I know you've been back, but do you remember life before?
Well, of course, and I actually remember the uprising because we were living around the corner from the main drag on Rooftop, which is like St Kilda Road in Hungary, in Budapest. And so the tanks came down.
Whoa.
On Rooftop. And yeah, so you could, we were kind of really very unfortunately close to the action. And I remember that. And I also remember going to school and yeah, I have definite memory of.
Oh, was it scary? Were you scared?
Oh, yeah. Well, as kids, were we scared of the uprising? No, I can't remember being scared. I had a friend whose flat was straight onto the street, which ours wasn't. Ours was at the back of the block. So I used to spend a bit of time with her, and her parents were forever telling us not to go out on the balcony.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we went out on the balcony. and there were some scary things happening. But I don't know, if your parents are with you and those things are sort of at a distance, they're not actually happening to you.
Yep.
I can't remember being afraid.
Yeah.
No.
And you were a punk kid, so
I wasn't. I really wasn't. I was a little,
angel?
No, I wasn't an angel, but I was just a
nobody.
nice little girl.
A nice little girl. I don't think so.
Oh.
But anyway, so here in Australia, your father had a pretty big influence on you.
Yes. Well, my father, who was 39 when he had me, had already previously to returning to, he was born in Hungary in 1911. Went to the United States in 1929.
Oh, okay.
Just to be there for the beginning of the, the crash, the Great Depression. But he actually worked all the way through, and he joined the Communist Party in the United States.
Right. Okay.
So, of course, in that period during the Great Depression, the Communist Party had a lot of members.
Yeah.
Because it was such a terrible time, and so people felt that it was a solution to the problem of the terrible poverty. So he remained a Communist Party member until he returned to Hungary in 1948, and that was when he met my mother, and then I was born in 1950. So
Right.
he remained, he wasn't a member of the party when we came here, but he remained, you know, one of the faithful.
Yeah.
And as people like that do, and had a great influence on me because, well, you know, the thing that we were brought up on, or that I was brought up on, was you have to leave the earth a better place than you found it. Just a little responsibility there.
Yeah.
And that was really
Do you
what
think
I
he
grew
did?
up with. I think he did, yeah.
He
I think
did?
he was really someone who, a genuinely decent person who
Right.
wanted good things for everybody.
Okay.
And so it wasn't his fault that things went the way they did.
Yeah.
But I've really, you know, tried to kind of live by that in a way, and been an activist all my
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
like he was, and it's been good.
Writing. Where did that come
Well,
to play
writing
for
was
you?
just something I was always interested in theatre from
Yep.
the time I was in
La Mama. You were
Well,
involved in-
yes, but you know, so I went. I eventually went to Rusden College, where it was the only place where you could do drama and media studies in those days.
And what's that part of? Was that part
Well,
of
that
the
was
university?
part of Monash University, but
Okay.
wasn't when I was there. So I was a late comer there. I
Well, that
was
doesn't surprise me. You'd always be a
I
bit
was
of a late comer.
able to return because Gough Whitlam was elected, and suddenly tertiary education was free.
Wow.
And as a
Excellent.
24-year-old, I could return to study and get an allowance. So I went back to college then and did drama and media studies, and it was there that I started writing for the university magazine, and then also I wrote my own shows and performed them, and I eventually did that at La Mama in the 1970s and 80s.
That Judith, that would have been such an
Oh,
exciting
it was
time.
fantastic time to do anything. La Mama was, you know, La Mama didn't happen until 68.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was the first place in Australia where the really kind of strange, weird, wonderful new theatre was, you know, was born.
Yeah.
And so we were, you know, producing, I mean, there was great, you know, a huge number of us who, many of whom became very famous, who, you know, performed there and wrote for the shows that were on there. And so, yeah, I just sort of went from there, and then I started writing a few short stories and a few articles. So I wrote and wrote, but it was really when I went back to Hungary that I started writing very seriously, because I was in Hungary between the middle of 87 and the end of 89 when the Cold War ended.
Right.
And there was no internet, so everything that I sent back here from Budapest was published.
Wow.
The Age Monthly Review wanted, because there was no, you know, there was hardly anyone there.
Yeah.
I don't know, I was away for 2.5 years, and I think I wrote something like 25 articles, and they were all published.
Right. Okay.
So I came back and then started to write longer, you know, started to write books.
So you're like you're doctor. When did all that happen?
Oh, well, that happened really quite soon. I came back from Hungary, went to see Chris Wallace-Crabb, who was the head of Australian Studies and who I'd been in touch with while I was away. And I said, what am I going to do now that I'm back here? And he said, you can do a master's with me. The master's actually ended up being a PhD, was a biography of a writer called George Turner, a science fiction writer,
Okay.
who won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize and who was a friend of mine.
Oh, because I was going to say why.
Yeah. Well, because I wrote a little bit of science fiction and went to a workshop that he ran in the 80s. So anyway, he allowed me to write his biography, and that was my PhD.
Which in a way, that's a bit cheating, isn't it? Because you got a book out of it.
Well,
as
no,
well
no,
as...
that was always my intention.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I didn't know how to do a PhD.
Right.
So, but I knew, well, I learned how to write a book from having written shorter things. You know, you do a lot of research, talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you form a narrative, and that's it.
Yeah.
But it was marvellous. And, you know, I mean, he's been dead for a long time now, but that was kind of the beginning of my long writing books.
Right. So tell us a little bit about him, because I don't really know him.
Well, George Turner is actually, it's quite interesting. He wrote a book called The Sea and Summer, which is one of the first climate change books, published in 91 or 89 or something like that. It's set in Melbourne. it's just an extraordinary book. And I was thinking about it the other day when we were having all that rain, because The Sea in Summer is about Melbourne becoming inundated with water every summer.
Right.
And really poor people living in these terrible towers, and wealthy people able to live in the sort of higher areas like Kew, where they weren't drowned.
Well, they still are,
in
aren't
America, they call the book Drowning Towers.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of... So he wrote many other books too and won quite a lot of prizes. And it was interesting. He was someone who many people thought was homosexual. He didn't deny it. He just got very angry when anyone brought it up.
Oh, do you think he was?
I think he was, but it was just a really problematic thing for me writing about him, because so many of his friends from every part of his life, and I met all his friends from, the time he was a very young man onwards, who they all thought he was, but he just would not have it. And he also, and I understand, I mean, he lived at a time when...
Well, it was a hard time.
He was, he was born in, I think, 1915 or something like that. So, and I think he maybe wasn't all that interested in sex, to be honest with you. He might have been one of those people. I don't know. He never married, never drank a lot. He was a big drinker.
Right.
And he had a difficult life, but he certainly made something of it. Anyway, I really liked him. We got on, and he didn't like that I wrote what I wrote.
Oh.
And it was quite interesting.
Okay.
Because I said, look, George, if you don't want me to, I won't publish it. And it looked like I wouldn't be able to publish it, even though Melbourne University Press was interested in it. And then he died. And my friend Judith Rodriguez, the famous writer, said, well, you're lucky, aren't you? But in fact, that book, my biography of George, is in 114 libraries all over the world.
Congratulations.
So I just feel, not for my sake, but for George's sake,
that
I'm so glad that I wrote it, because, and now he's coming into fashion again, because climate change is everything.
Yeah.
So I've had calls from French and Spanish publishers wanting to translate his Sea and Summer into French and Spanish, and that's all going ahead. So
right.
So in a way, it's good that I wrote that book, because they contact me, because they find that book, and then George is gone, so they can't contact him, and then I put them onto his executor.
Right. Tell us about Penn.
Penn was a fantastic, that also came out of my Hungarian stay in 1987 to 89. Tom Shapcott became a friend of mine at that time, and he was the treasurer of the Melbourne Centre of Penn. So when I came back to Australia in the 90s, he immediately contacted me and said, you've got to join Penn, which is an international writers' organisation formed 1921, so it's more than 100 years old now. There are centres all over the world. They have a congress every year, and it's helped to free so many writers who have been imprisoned.
Oh, wow.
And and persecuted all over the world.
Yeah.
The Writers in Prison Committee is the most vital part of Penn, and has done a huge job really on behalf of writers, because writers are always in the first, they're in the vanguard for, they're in prison straight away if they've written something. So I joined, and then he very soon, I only joined for about a year, and he said, oh, I think we'll have Judy as the next president of Melbourne Penn. And I went, oh, really? And then after I'd been in Penn for a while, I was became chair of the Women Writers Committee in the world.
Right, wow.
It was fantastic.
Good on you.
Travelling every year to all these different places,
Yeah,
meeting writers from all over the world. It was wonderful.
You've won quite a few awards over the years. Well, hold on, let's stretch it.
Yeah.
Millions of awards, a couple
that's
of really.
very sweet of you.
What does that mean to a writer?
Oh, it's great. I think all writers, even, people like Patrick White, we never stop feeling insecure. And so anything where somebody has really come along and said, no, you're really good, and it's some official person. I mean, it's ridiculous, really,
Yeah.
because of course there's millions of writers who are
Yeah.
fantastic who never win awards,
Yeah.
so the whole thing is just rubbish. But you hang on to anything that you
Yeah.
can get, you
Yeah.
know. So particularly the Acland Street book was, of course, such a success too, you know. The books of mine that have sold a lot of copies have been the history of St Kilda Road, the history of Collins Street, and the history of Acland Street.
Right.
Those are the
Which is
three
called
books.
The Lady of St
The
Kilda.
Lady of St
And
Kilda.
I love that name
Yeah.
because that was
The Grand
name,
Lady of
the
St.
Grand Lady, and because that was the boat.
That was the boat, yes, the Lady
Yeah.
of St Kilda.
Right.
So I've had a great interest in St Kilda all of my life. When we came here from Hungary, despite the fact that I'm not a Polish Jew, I'm a Hungarian Jew, I joined SCIF, which is a youth organisation for Jewish kids, and it was in Wellington Street. So, you know, from 1961 onwards, we met every Sunday in Wellington Street. I used to go to the beach in St Kilda. I loved it that there were all these different kinds of people in St Kilda, and there was already in the 60s, not just the migrants, but a lot of gay people. Oh my goodness, it was just such a melting pot of artists and migrants and gay people and prostitutes and,
Yep.
you know, the whole gamut.
The whole drug,
That's right.
drug world,
and so then I went to the National Theatre, which was also in St Kilda,
Yep.
and I've just always had this very strong connection and written a lot.
We're going to jump a lot here, a lot forward, because, you know, this year you've been writing.
Yes.
What?
I was asked by Jude Munro, who was the creator of the Victorian Pride Centre.
Well, she was the chair of the
She was the
board.
chair of the board,
Yeah.
and really she was, I shouldn't say that because the whole board was fantastic, but I think without her incredible energy and force, it would not have come off. Anyway, she's been a friend of mine since high school days.
I find that really interesting that you've known each other since school days. And
Yeah, well, we were both at Macrob. We both began at Macrobertson Girls High School in 1965. And weren't particularly close friends, but liked each other, always liked each other. And then, of course, you know, we lost contact and variously I picked up contact with her again through some of my projects. But so she rang me, so this would have been about August last year, and said, we'd like you to write the story of the making of the Pride Centre.
now, for those viewers that don't know what the Victorian
Oh,
Pride
yes,
Centre
right.
is, what is it?
Well, it's a fantastic community building that houses quite a few organisations that are there for the benefit of gay people.
Not just gay people, the LGBTIQ plus.
Sorry, LGBTIQ plus. It's hard for an old fart like me to not say gay.
True.
Queer, I should say queer.
Yeah.
That's a better word. So it houses all these organisations, but it doesn't just house the organisations, it's also a meeting place, there's a theatre, there are lots of little fabulous places where you can just meet someone, sit in a booth, and soon the cafe will open. You'll be able to have a coffee there.
The roof.
The roof
the
is
views
fantastic.
and all that. And where did the money come from?
It was an initiative, really, of the Labor government that was elected, I think, first in 2014 in Victoria, so Daniel Andrews. And I think it was part of their brief that if they came to power, they would build a Pride Centre. So
Very ambitious.
yes, absolutely. So they initially said that they would give $15 million toward the building of a Pride Centre. The site had not been chosen then, and there was a call for interest from different suburbs and different universities.
Councils, yeah.
So I think there were only 3 or 4, I think City of Melbourne, City of Yarra and City of Port Phillip were the only ones that... City of Melbourne put in 2 possibilities, and the City of Port Phillip was the one that offered to give the land that was in Fitzroy Street. So it wasn't like they were giving a building and that, you know, the Pride Centre would have it for 10 years or whatever. They just said, right,
There's
we're going to buy this
land. Yep.
Munro's restaurant was there.
I know there's two brothers that own it. I know one of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also, you know, that was actually a meeting place for some gay members of the community. So
he told me the story that and him and his brother had to work. His father had the little sort of milk bar, and all the prostitutes and and all the drag queens and all that the drug dealers would come there, and then they bought the next building, and they had to work there. So he was so proud, and he told me, he said, the property is on hold for the city of Port Phillip. But he was thrilled also the fact that where it was going, what was going to happen with the building.
So there was that, and Martin Foley, of course, was the first Minister for Equality that we ever had in Australia as well. Port Phillip gave the land, so we had the site, and then an architectural competition was held, and James Brearley and Grant Amon got together. They're two architects who have their rooms, both of them, in Fitzroy Street. And now the building that they created has won every architectural prize in Australia. It's just been, it's the most beautiful, extraordinary building. But not only is it beautiful, what I think is amazing about it is that you walk in and there's such a feeling of serenity and welcome in that building. I mean, it's great that we have the concierge who greet you when you come in and ask you what you'd like.
Or ignore you if you're just walking through, if they know you know what you're doing.
But you know, that there's such a feeling of I don't know, it's just a lovely, lovely building to be in.
And as you said, there's all the little booths and couches that anyone can come in, use the free Wi-Fi.
Anyone, it's completely open to the public.
Yep.
And it's open from, you know, I think 9 o'clock in the morning till 6
o'clock.
Every day, 7 days a week.
Yep.
And there's usually an exhibition on, so that you've got, you know, lovely things
But you
to
walk
look
to
at.
the back of the building and there's these stairs with,
it's just divine.
Yeah,
it's
so
divine.
people go and check it out.
So really go and have a look at the Pride Centre. Whoever you are watching this program, go and have a look and have a nice little browse around whatever the exhibition is that's on at the moment, and enjoy.
And because I live local, so many of my friends and family, when they come to town, I take them on tours.
Of course,
I take them on tours.
That's where I meet my friends now.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, all the public transport is so fantastic around there. So it's easy even for people who live on the other side of town, who all think that the Pride Centre should have been on the other side of town. But yeah, they're happy to come down to Fitzroy Street and meet there. And I think it's been a really important thing for St Kilda and for Fitzroy Street, because that end of Fitzroy Street has been very run down.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Queer Film Festival have been doing rooftop cinemas there.
That's right.
And just that rooftop, it's one of the best views. Best views of Melbourne. Yeah. And the bay, you look out on the bay as well.
I've been to a couple of parties up there.
I
really
think I have too. So what have you written about? What is it?
Well, the first half of the book is a history of the queer community, sort of in St Kilda, but really kind of much broader than that. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, and even a little bit in the world, because the queer community is a community that's always had some members of the queer community, if they were artistic or writers or whatever, have always had contacts in other parts of the world.
Yep.
So women educators, quite a few lesbian educators, you know, who are sort of principals of private schools, went to international conferences in the 1920s and 30s. So I've really talked, you know, even Oscar Wilde is mentioned, Gertrude Stein is mentioned. Wow. Because I think it's really important for people to understand that the queer community has, even though it's been illegal, and it's especially, you know, for men, it's been so difficult, well, for women too, because they were ostracised as well if they came out or were made to come out. So the first half of the book is really a history of the queer community and its struggles and you know, the really difficult times, and then the change that started to happen in the 1960s, and how, you know, things have really come to a fantastic... the Pride Centre for me is the high point of that, you know, that we've come out of that struggle. Well, we haven't really, but to a degree out of that period of struggle. And the Pride Centre was then created because it's a real statement of acceptance.
Yes. And the archives are there as well.
The archives, of course I did,
them?
Yeah. So I did that. And then the second half of the book is actually about the creation of the Pride Centre. So who were the people involved? What were the stages? What kind of things were considered to be important in creating a community that had very strong rules about how it was going to be used, and, you know, who could use it, that it had to be very equal, had to be very open, you know, for young people, for older people, for every part of the community. I think that was a really important thing that they considered. So it's just these two halves, beautifully illustrated, full of fantastic images.
What does it mean to you? You know, like you mentioned about the Acland Street, the St Kilda Road book, the Ripponlea. There's the rowing, you know, the women's rowing. You know, like you've written so many, but all of a sudden it's this real. It's a very important building for Victoria,
That's right,
for Australia, and for the world.
Well, I think for the social history of Australia, it's probably one of the most important things that's ever happened. I mean, in every single one of my books, I've talked about all of the important communities, particularly the queer community, but other communities too, and how they shaped. I mean, somewhere like Collins Street that had so many artists, and there were a lot of, for instance, there was a whole arcade in Collins Street. It was full of women photographers who were lesbians. I mean, you know, there's things like that I've talked about these things in every one of my books. But I think, so the thing about the Pride Centre history for me, I think, is the you know, for an activist like me, you know, I've been an activist now for 50 years, it's just so fantastic to have victory. We don't have them that often. You know, when you're always trying to get equality or climate change or all of the issues that are important, you really have to celebrate when something, and in the last 10 years for the queer community have been, when you look at all of the documents that I've looked at, it's just been, the change has been extraordinary.
There are always going to be knockers for it as well, aren't there?
Yeah,
you know, like, well, why? Why does there have to be this building?
Lots of people have said, you know, why do queer people deserve to get a building like this? Extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is.
Oh, absolutely, it's there. Yeah.
But the, you know, like we were mentioning it before, but the use of it now, even to the extent where you can go there and vote. Right,
yes,
that's
right.
Moment,
that's
you know,
right.
like,
that's right.
Which is just fantastic.
Yeah, and you could get your COVID vaccinations there.
Yep.
And it's film festivals. Midsummer is going to have a whole lot of events there. And I've noticed too that there, you know, because I go to those Sunday markets, you know, when they have
once a month,
and the sausage sizzle. That's the most important part.
Most important part.
And of course, it is a lot of queer people, but it's also just a lot of the local community.
Yeah,
local
you know, like
people.
mums and dads with their kids running right through the place, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And also from my behalf, Joy 94.9's there, the radio station that I've been involved in for many years. We were in the city and we were literally told, well, you're moving there. You know, like you've got, you know, like you're the flagship that we need.
Absolutely. And now you've got this fantastic studio there that is not just for radio, but for television, for all kinds of media.
And it's, again, it's part of a meeting place.
That's right.
And that's what Joy's always been. It's a community organisation. It's one of only a few in the world as well. Right. And, you know, it's out of Melbourne. So, you know, Melbourne is very groundbreaking like that, isn't it?
Yeah. And minus 18 is there, so that's the switchboard for the under 18s. There's all of the organisations that are there really serve the community, and I think that's just so wonderful.
And there's doctors, GPs are there, and And it's wonderful. Well, can't wait to read the book. Are you excited about it coming out?
It's been a year of such intense work for me, and in interviewing extraordinary people who are involved, going into through all of the minute books, all the just really intense work, and then to finally have a fantastic, beautiful product that you can buy. You just go into the Pride Centre website if you want to buy the book, and you'll see all the instructions there.
And that's the only place it's being sold.
That is the only place that's being sold because it's a fundraiser. They're trying to get a rooftop pavilion built.
Right.
And so all of the profit will go into making the rooftop pavilion. So they've decided that they really want to sell the book only at the Pride Centre so that the money can go into that.
And you were actually saying to me that there's not even a barcode on it because they don't want it to go through bookshops. It's only going to be sold at the Pride Centre.
That's right, that's right.
Judith, thank you so much for chatting with us today, and thank you for all the amazing books that you've written, and you're really helping us understand what life was like in certain areas, and and so people rush out and find her books because they're amazing. Judith Buckrich, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for watching. I'm David Hunt, and you're watching Bent TV on Channel 31.